Start off by measuring from the bottom of the pot and about a foot above the tallest leaf. Next, I like to use PVC pipe. It doesn't rot, and you can add on to it later as the plant grows. I'm using cocoa fiber right here. Aerial roots attach really well to this product, so it's a great thing to use. Next, I just use fishing line or some twine to secure the moss pole or secure the cocoa fiber to the moss pole, to the PVC pipe, whatever I'm saying. Okay. But yeah, I like to go up once and then back down to make it nice and sharp and clean looking, really tight. Next up, for repotting, I like to get rid of most of the soil, and that's because I want to sort of integrate the PVC pipe part of the moss pole in with the roots. I don't want to just shove the pole through the root system and break a whole bunch of roots. I like to kind of wrap the roots around the moss pole. It just makes for a really sturdy build. Next, I'm going to do some pruning, so clean off your pruners. I'm going to get rid of a whole bunch of these smaller bottom leaves. They're starting to die off anyway, but also they're largely shaded out by the bigger leaves above it, so they're not doing a whole bunch of work. Next, we're going to mix up our soil and get that ready for adding the moss pole to it. Next, we're just going to tie up some of the pieces to secure it, and then we're going to repot it. We just go up a 1 pot size for the monstera, and then we're going to backfill right there, and then we're going to keep shaping and kind of look for what we want. It's kind of hard to get a full accurate idea of what this plant really looks like because it's kind of dehydrated right now, so you don't really get to see the full effect, but it is a beauty. And just like that, we have another happy customer. Here's what our mobile repotting service looks like. Usually I would do this in the back of the van, but as you'll see here in a minute, this plant was gigantic. This is a massive pothos that the person's pot was breaking out of. So it was time for a soil change and time for an upgrade in the pot. It took me a long time to untangle all the vines from the previous trellis. The previous trellis had rotted away also. It wasn't really supporting anything anymore. So we're going to go ahead and replace that as well. But it was tied up in a lot of places, and I'll show you at the end of the video, the vines on this thing are super, super thick. Probably the thickest that I've ever seen in a in-home, like true house plant, not one that's growing outside or anything like that. The root ball was not as large as I thought it was going to be, which is actually nice for me because it wasn't super heavy. But you can see me squishing the roots to make sure that they are healthy. I cut away all the extra dead stuff. It's not just about repotting. You also want to make the plant look nice and do all those little tedious chores that maybe have gone by the wayside for a period of time. It's about now that I remembered that I had gloves, but it was a little bit too late. So I mixed up some soil because we're about to put this baby in its new home. A little bit of regular potting mix and some perlite will do the trick. They do like a little extra drainage. Had to keep the original pole in there because it was very heavily attached to that wood, and I didn't want to damage the plant by trying to remove it from that. So here's our new trellis. This is a cedar trellis, and now we're just going to start vining them back on. This was probably one of the more fun parts. You kind of get to redesign the thing and kind of set it up for success so that it can keep vining and fill in all the dead spots, all the blank areas, and make it look nice and full and happy and healthy. On here I did a little propagation because we had a ton of stem without any leaves. So that's how I do it right there. Cut it and I just put it right back in the soil. These things root up super, super easily, so it won't be a problem. So there we go. We've got a nice new, gosh, this is probably like an 18-inch pot. Not cracked. It's perfectly nice. Look at these vines. I told you I was going to show them to you. These are like as thick as my thumb. This is the backside there. Try not to put too much on the backside because it will be up against a wall. I was actually here for about 3 hours doing other plants, but I'll show that in another video. Yesterday we did that massive pothos. Today we're going to be doing the peace lily. This customer had me out to her house to repot several of her plants, and this one was doing pretty well. You can see bright light right there is making those blooms come out green perfectly fine. The tap water is probably making the brown tips of that plant. But we got her out pretty safely. It has a healthy root system. I mixed up a 1-to-1 ratio of houseplant soil and perlite and got it in there, potted it up, backfilled it. Here's a helpful tip when repotting your plants. I like to have my plants like really well centered and symmetrical, especially for a symmetrical plant like this. So before I really firm everything up, I'll take a step back, make sure that it's centered, look at it from different angles, make sure that it's just how I want to do it, and then I'll come back around and firm the soil up. You can see me kind of moving the plant back and forth to make sure that it's upright and beautiful. And just like that, we have another happy plant. Customer brought us several of her plants to be repotted, but worst amongst them all was this orchid. The bloom stem had died off, but that's not the big deal. The big problem is this severe case of dehydration. Now, believe it or not, this can actually come from overwatering or underwatering. However, we do find later out in the video that is from underwatering. The roots were extremely dry and therefore they had not been taking up moisture, so the leaves were looking sad and definitely not rad. I tried to break up the moss ball here, but it was so dehydrated it was like a brick, so I put it in some water for about 10 minutes so it could soak it up, rehydrate that moss so it's easier to peel it away from the roots without damaging them. After that, I wanted to clip away all of the dead roots. You want to get rid of them. I like to, of course, sanitize my pruners with a hydrogen peroxide, and then any roots that are not firm are ones that you're going to want to clip off. They might be papery thin, they might be mushy. Either way, we want to get rid of them. And then afterwards, we just sanitize the extra or the remaining roots, the healthy roots, with another dose of the hydrogen peroxide. After that, we are just going to repot. Now, I only showed the repotting of the one orchid, but we actually did several of them, and she wanted them in a big old arrangement like this. I'm just using a cocoa chips here for this one. It's nice moisture retention, but also provides a lot of air to the orchid. And just like that, we're doing well. We'll expect it to take another week or so for it to rehydrate those leaves, but it is on its way to recovery and should be a beautiful little arrangement. These fuzzy white creatures like to suck the sugar out of your plant. And if you let it get out of hand, they can actually kill the plant. So here's how we take care of them before they take care of the plant. So first of all, they're identified by they're white little fuzzy kind of creatures. And I like to kill them with neem oil. Now, first of all, we're just going to manually pluck them off of there. And then afterward, we're going to wipe die sucker. Afterward, we're going to wipe the area down that they were on with neem oil. And they're really good at hiding, so you have to be very thorough in how you're looking through the plant. They hide in unfurled leaves. You can see that right now. This new leaf is coming up and it's unfurling. It's just inside of that little furled up leaf. They can hide in the crevices. They can hide in the stems. They can even hide in the soil. If you have a big infestation, like there's a lot of sticky residue all over your plant, it might be good to repot your plant because they can be in the root system. They can suck sugars out of the roots. So inspect everything, especially the back leaves. From there, I just quarantine it for the next couple of weeks to monitor, make sure there aren't any ones that we missed, and then you can put it back in Gen Pop. This is probably a plant that you've killed before, but I want to encourage you to try again because they are super, super easy. First things first, they're going to need bright light, okay? So make sure you're giving them a nice wide view of the sky. Now, if they are not blooming for you, then give it brighter light. If the blooms are coming out and they're green, you want to move it back from the window. Find that happy medium to where the blooms are coming out and they're the appropriate color. Next up is watering. During the spring and summer months, we water when they're 25% dry. And then in the winter time, you can back it off to 50% dry. If you're going to replant it, make sure that it's in a really chunky, airy kind of mix. They like a lot of drainage and airflow to their roots. And then general purpose fertilizing throughout the spring and summer months. The important thing to remember is to get plants that all have similar light requirements. They can have different soil requirements, but if they have to have different light, it's just not going to work. Now, the way we do it with different soil requirements is we just keep them in their nursery pots. You can just false pot them into a decorative pot that doesn't have drainage. You can stick all these low light babies in here. We've got a Scindapsus, we've got a snake plant, and we've got a low light Haworthia. Get them all nice and snug in there. And then for all of the gaps that we have in there, we just fill that in with some decorative moss. And when you need to water them, you can simply pop them out of their little decorative container, water them individually because their watering needs are also different, and then stick them back in, recover with moss, and you're all set to go. A cute little arrangement that's going to last forever. This is a really easy fix, and it comes from when the soil has been dehydrated and not aerated properly. So we're going to grab a blunt object. I use this knitting needle, but you can also use a chopstick or any other blunt kind of object, a bamboo skewer. And you're just going to poke a bunch of holes in the soil. That's going to break up the dirt clumps, and it's going to allow water to travel where you poke those holes through. Take it to your watering area, set it in there, and give it a really good thorough soak. Let it drain through several times. That's going to cure your problem going forward. Just aerate regularly from then on. And for those worried about our sink, here's how you repot the bird of paradise. I like to give it a little massage and then use my feet to pull it up out of the pot. A little pro insider tip there for you. Massage the roots, get a bunch of that old soil off. We're going to be replacing that with some new soil here today. There was nothing wrong with the plant. The customer just wanted it in this nice decorative pot. Make sure that you're using a mask when you're mixing up perlite and stuff. That dust is pretty nasty stuff. I like to cover the drainage hole with this cocoa fiber here. Now, it allows the water to still go through, but it keeps the soil from, pouring out into your sink and you lose soil and whatnot. So put some in the bottom there, and then we're just going to backfill. Make sure that you are tapping the sides of your pot to get the soil all mixed in down there. You can see how it kind of settles in all the little nooks and crannies. I like to leave about 1 inch to 1/2 inch at the top for the soil level, just so water doesn't spill out every time you go. But there you have it, little quick, easy repot. 5 signs your plant might need some water. The leaves have wilted and the soil is dry. This is really common with plants that store water in their leaves, like snake plants and succulents. If your leaves are turning wrinkly and they kind of feel like leather, might be time to give it a water. The soil has started to crack and actually separated from the pot. Here's one you can use if you are more familiar with your plant, and that is the weight of the plant. Now, this one does have that cracking that we were seeing in the previous plant, and it's like feather weight. There's like no weight to this at all, at least not as much weight as you would expect wet soil to be holding. So the weight of your plant, if it's like really, really light, probably needs a soak. Only water until it starts coming out of the bottom drainage holes. Take a look and see what happens. Because the goal is to saturate the entire root system, right? Every time we water. All right. So you see, we have wet spots down here and dry gaps all around the entire root system. So we're missing a ton of those roots. So what happens then, watering like this creates a very weak root system over time. The health of the roots is the health of the plant. So do yourself a favor and let it drain through several times over. Saturate that root system, get a healthy root system, get a healthy plant.